The midday sun over the Capitol was a relentless, unforgiving thing. It bleached the color from the sky and turned the vast concrete parade ground of the National Military Headquarters into a shimmering mirage. On this particular Tuesday, the air was thick not just with heat, but with a profound, almost sacred silence. The entire compound was holding its breath. Today was the final inspection before the National Day Parade, the single most important event in the military calendar. And presiding over this rehearsal was the man they called the Iron Duke, Lieutenant General Aris Thorne. General Thorne was a figure carved from the very history he helped write. At 63, his back was as straight as the sword he carried on ceremonial occasions, his jaw a rigid line of authority, and his eyes, the color of a winter sky, held a cold, penetrating power that could make a seasoned colonel stammer. His uniform, pristine white with gold epaulets laden with honors, seemed to repel dust and sweat. He had served in conflicts that were now textbook case studies, had rebuilt battalions from the ground up, and had personally mentored a generation of officers who now commanded divisions. To the men and women on the parade ground, he was less a man and more a monument, a living embodiment of duty, discipline, and the unyielding spirit of their nation. His gaze swept across the assembled companies. Rows upon rows of soldiers from the elite 1st Royal Guard Battalion stood frozen in the heat, their dark dress uniforms heavy, their brass buttons and polished steel blinding. They were the best of the best, human weapons honed to a razor's edge, chosen for their impeccable bearing and unwavering obedience. A bead of sweat tracing a path down a young private's temple was a sign of weakness. A microscopic wobble in a presented rifle was a catastrophic failure. Under the general's scrutiny, perfection was not an aspiration, it was the minimum requirement. Today's focus was on a single yet critical maneuver, the general's salute. As the reviewing officer, General Thorne would walk the line. When he stopped before the guard commander, that officer was to issue a series of sharp, powerful commands, culminating in a full ceremonial salute from the entire battalion. It was a symphony of precision, a dance of power and respect, and it had to be flawless. The general began his slow, deliberate walk. The only sound was the scuff of his impeccably polished black shoes on the hot tarmac and the distant, mournful cry of a hawk circling above the city. He passed the first company, his eyes flitting over faces that stared rigidly ahead. He saw nothing. He was looking for the flaw, the crack in the armor. He found none, and his expression remained a mask of stony disapproval. He stopped at the center of the line, directly in front of the guard commander. This was the moment. The commander, a major with a chest full of medals and a face tight with concentration, drew a breath that was barely perceptible. "Battalion, shun!" The command was crisp, cutting through the silence like a knife. 1,000 heels clicked as one, a sound like a single giant rock hitting the ground. The air vibrated. "Battalion, present, arms!" The second command was a roar. In a movement so practiced it was a blur. 1,000 rifles were brought up and across the soldiers' chests in the ceremonial salute. The glint of steel in the sun was blinding. It was, by any measure, a perfect execution. The general, however, did not acknowledge it. He didn't nod, didn't offer a flicker of approval. He simply began his final duty, the inspection. He walked along the first rank, his eyes scanning the men. He stopped before a young soldier, a lad named Private Thomas, whose face was beaded with sweat. The general's gaze fell to the young man's rifle, held rigidly across his chest. With a gloved hand, he reached out and with one finger wiped a microscopic smudge of dust from the barrel. He didn't say a word, but his message was as clear as a shouted command. "You are not perfect. You will never be perfect enough." He moved on, the silence growing heavier with each step. He was halfway down the line when the moment came. He stopped. Not in front of a commissioned officer or a seasoned sergeant, but before a soldier in the 3rd rank. This soldier was different. While the others were statues, he was something else. His salute was textbook, his uniform immaculate, his face expressionless. But it was his eyes that gave him away. They were not fixed on a point in the distance, as regulations demanded. They were fixed on the general, and they were burning with an emotion so raw, so unexpected, and that it stopped the Iron Duke in his tracks. It was hatred, pure, incandescent, and utterly undisciplined hatred. It was a look that would have seen any other man court-martialed. But in this frozen moment, it was more than just a look. It was a challenge. The general had seen fear, respect, and desperate eagerness in the eyes of thousands of soldiers. He had seen the hollow stare of the traumatized and the blind obedience of the brainwashed. But he had never, in all his decades of service, been looked at with such unadulterated personal loathing by a subordinate during a ceremonial parade. For a full 5 seconds, a lifetime in the world of military precision, General Thorne stood frozen, staring at the young man. The silence, already profound, became a physical pressure on everyone present. The major commanding the battalion felt his heart stop. He could see from his peripheral vision that something was terribly wrong. The entire parade ground, 1,000 men, seemed to lean in, confused by the unnatural pause in the ritual. The general's mind, a supercomputer of tactical analysis and strategic thought, scrambled for an explanation. Who was this boy? Why did he look at him like a mortal enemy? Thorne had been responsible for decisions that had sent men to their deaths, for training so brutal it broke the weak. He had enemies, certainly, but they were generals in other countries, politicians in opposition parties. Not a young, an anonymous private in his own royal guard. Then, as quickly as the storm had appeared in the soldier's eyes, it was gone. A shutter came down. The face became a perfect expressionless mask, just like all the others. The eyes fixed themselves on a point 1,000 yards away. But it was too late. The damage was done. The general's legendary composure was shattered. He saw the ghost of a tremor in the young man's jaw, a muscle clenched tight enough to crack teeth. This was not insubordination. This was pain, a deep, festering, personal pain, and for some reason, he was its focus. General Thorne, for the first time in his career, forgot the next step in the protocol. He just stood there. A low murmur began to ripple through the ranks, quickly silenced by the glares of senior NCOs. The major was now in a cold sweat, mentally drafting his letter of resignation. The situation was a catastrophe in the making. Finally, with a monumental effort of will, General Thorne broke the spell. He took a single, almost imperceptible step backward. He did not resume his inspection. He didn't look at the major or offer any word of praise or criticism for the drill. He simply turned on his heel and walked away from the formation, his strides long and swift, heading not towards the reviewing stand, but towards the administrative buildings. He left behind a battalion in shock, a major on the verge of a heart attack, and 1,000 men wondering if they had just witnessed a legend crack. The general didn't stop until he reached his office, a sprawling, wood-paneled sanctuary on the top floor. He closed the heavy door and stood in the middle of the room, the cool air a sharp contrast to the oppressive heat outside. He didn't sit down. He walked to the window and stared out at the city he had sworn to protect, his reflection a ghost in the glass. The face that stared back at him was not the face of the Iron Duke. It was the face of an old man, suddenly confronted with a ghost he didn't know existed. He replayed the moment over and over. The eyes. They hadn't just been angry. They had been accusing. They had held a story, a history. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Who was that soldier? He strode to his desk and pressed the intercom. His adjutant, a sharp young captain, answered immediately. "Sir, get me the personnel file for the 1st Royal Guard Battalion. Immediately. Yeah, and I want to know the name of every soldier in the third rank of the second company. Now, Captain, that is an order. Yes, sir. The line went dead. The general sat heavily in his leather chair. The room was filled with the trophies of a lifetime. Ceremonial swords, framed photographs with presidents and prime ministers, flags from campaigns long past. They all felt hollow now. He had built his entire identity on control, on order, on the absolute reliability of the machine he commanded. And in the space of 5 silent seconds, a single, unknown soldier had thrown a wrench into the gears, revealing a terrifying truth. The machine had a memory, and that memory held a grudge. 20 minutes later, a nervous captain knocked and entered, placing a slim folder on the general's desk. The battalion file, sir, and the name of the soldier in that position is Private First Class Julian Keller, age 22, 2 years of service, exemplary record, no disciplinary issues, top marks in marksmanship, quiet, keeps to himself. His commanding officer describes him as a model soldier. General Thorne opened the file. The first thing he saw was a photograph, a young man with a serious face, the same face that had just burned a hole in his soul with its hatred. He scanned the details: place of birth, the capital, education, completed high school. Next of kin: mother, Elena Keller, address in the East District. He flipped to the next page, a standard medical form. And then a page of training scores, all excellent. Then at the very back, a small, folded document. It was a letter of recommendation written 5 years ago from a high school principal, supporting Julian's application for a junior military scholarship. The general read the principal's words, praising Julian's character and his unwavering dedication to his family following a personal tragedy. Personal tragedy. The words jumped off the page. General Thorne leaned back, a cold hand gripping his heart. He looked at the date on the letter, then at Julian's enlistment date. He did the math. 5 years ago. Julian would have been 17. A personal tragedy just before his final year of high school. He closed the file and looked out the window again, but this time he wasn't seeing the city. He was seeing another city, another time. He was seeing the smoke and chaos of Operation Silent Storm, a controversial urban counterinsurgency mission from 6 years ago. And he remembered the intelligence reports, the difficult decisions, the civilian casualties that were labeled collateral damage in the official reports. He remembered the one incident that had haunted the mission, a strike on a suspected militant safe house in the East District that had later been discovered to have been a family home. The intelligence had been wrong. It was a tragedy, a black mark on an otherwise successful operation, and it had been quietly buried. The East District. At the timeline. The hatred in a young man's eyes. It couldn't be. It was too much of a coincidence. General Thorne had given the order for that strike. He had signed off on the mission based on the intelligence he was given. He had lived with the weight of that decision, the knowledge that mistakes had been made, that innocent people had died. But he had never put a face to the statistics. Until now. The Iron Duke, the man who had faced enemy fire without flinching, had felt his hand tremble as he reached for the intercom again. This time, his voice was different. The steel was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost human. "Captain, get me Private Keller. I want to see him. In my office. Now." The wait was agonizing. The general paced the room, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions: duty, guilt, protocol, and a strange, burgeoning sense of responsibility warred within him. When the knock finally came, it was sharp and professional. "See, enter." The door opened, and Private First Class Julian Keller walked in. He stopped 2 paces in front of the general's desk and snapped to attention, his eyes fixed on the wall behind Thorne's head. The perfect soldier. The mask was firmly in place, but the general could see the slight flaring of his nostrils, the heightened color in his cheeks. The hatred was there, barely contained beneath the surface. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. So General Thorne gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Private." Julian didn't move. "Standing is fine, sir." The general nodded, accepting the small act of defiance. He leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "I'm not going to ask you about the look you gave me on the parade ground. We both know what it was. I'm going to ask you a different question. Who am I to you, Private Keller? Not a general. Not your commanding officer. Who am I?" For a long moment, Julian didn't move. Then, slowly, his gaze dropped from the wall and met the general's. The mask was gone. The eyes were the same as before, but now, up close, the general could see the depth of the pain in them. It was a raw, open wound. Julian's voice, when it came, was low and steady, but it carried the weight of years. "You're the man who killed my family, sir." The words hung in the air, simple and devastating. General Thorne felt as if he'd been punched in the chest. He didn't flinch, didn't look away. He simply nodded, on a slow, heavy movement. "Tell me." And Julian did. He told him about his father, a teacher, and his mother, a nurse. He told him about his younger sister, 12 years old, who loved to draw. He told him about the night 6 years ago, when he was at a friend's house studying for exams. He told him about the explosion that had leveled his home in the East District. He told him about going to the rubble the next morning, about finding his sister's charred sketchbook, and about identifying his parents' bodies at the morgue. He told him about the official investigation that went nowhere, the claims of military necessity, the story that his family had been unfortunate collateral damage. He told him about the years of silence, the grief that had turned to anger, and the anger that had hardened into a single, burning purpose: to get close enough to the man responsible to look him in the eye. "I joined the army," Julian said, in his voice cracking for the first time. "The Royal Guard, the best of the best. I did it so I could stand before you, so you could see me, so you would have to look at the face of the collateral damage you ordered destroyed." The general listened without interrupting. When Julian finished, the room was silent again. The trophies on the walls seemed to mock him. This was his legacy. Not the campaign's won, but this boy, this man, is shaped by the consequences of a decision made in a war room 6 years ago. General Thorne slowly rose from his chair. He walked around the desk, his movements heavy with age and the weight of the revelation. He stopped a few feet from Julian. The soldier was rigid, his fists clenched at his sides, tears of rage and grief now freely tracking down his cheeks, though he made no move to wipe them away. The general, the Iron Duke. He did something that would have been inconceivable to anyone who knew him. He didn't offer a justification, a legal defense, or a lesson in the harsh realities of command. He simply stood there, his own eyes glistening. He looked at the young man, really looked at him, seeing not a private, but the 17-year-old boy who had lost everything. "I am sorry," he said. The words were simple, quiet, and utterly devoid of the command voice. They were the words of a man, stripped of rank and title. "Thus, for the order I gave, for the intelligence that failed, for the system that covered it up, and for the 6 years of silence you have endured alone, I am profoundly and deeply sorry." It wasn't enough. It could never be enough. Both of them knew that. Julian stared at him, searching for the lie, for the political deflection. He found only a raw, painful honesty in the old man's face. The apology didn't bring his parents back, and it didn't resurrect his sister or restore the life that was stolen from him. But in that moment, the monolithic, untouchable figure of the enemy crumbled, replaced by a fallible human being. The hatred didn't vanish, but it shifted. It was no longer a cold, pure flame. It was now tangled with something unexpected, the shared acknowledgement of a terrible truth. The general didn't try to touch him. He simply stood there, bearing witness. "I don't expect your forgiveness, Private Keller. I don't deserve it. But you deserve to say that. You deserve to be heard. And you were." He walked back to his desk, but he didn't sit in his chair. He stood behind it, his hand resting on a framed photograph of his own family. "What happens now is your choice," he said quietly. "You can report this. You can go to the media. You can try to have me court-martialed. It will be a long, ugly fight, and the institution will protect itself. They will try to destroy you to protect me. Or, we can find another way. A private way. I can't give you back your family, but I can ensure their story is not forgotten. I can make sure that what happened to them is officially acknowledged, not as collateral damage, but as a tragic mistake, with names and faces. I can use whatever power I have left to try and do some small measure of good. The choice is yours." Julian stood there, a storm of emotions playing across his face. The perfect soldier was gone. In his place was a young man, and confronted with the impossible choice between vengeance and a different kind of justice. He didn't have an answer, not yet. He simply looked at the general, a man he had come to hate, and saw only another human being, scarred by the same past. Without another word, Julian turned and walked out of the office, leaving the door slightly ajar. He left behind the Iron Duke, standing alone amidst the symbols of his power, which now seemed like nothing more than hollow trophies. And the general looked at the open door, then back at the city outside. The parade ground was empty now, baking in the afternoon sun. The rehearsal was over, but for both of them, a different kind of duty had just begun. The long, uncertain work of facing the past.